Alright, today I'm going to be talking to you guys about installation art. Installation art is a term used to describe large-scale mixed media environments that are often site-specific, which means that they're just designed for a specific space, and installed for a temporary period of time. What makes installation unique from sculpture and other traditional art forms is that it presents a complete and unified experience or environment within the gallery space instead of the display of separate individual artworks. Rather than passively looking at an artwork, the focus of installation art is to create an experience for the viewer. Installations often occupy an entire room or gallery space, with the viewer walking within them to fully engage with the work. Installation art can take multiple forms and often incorporates mixed materials, light, and sound. Some examples of different kinds of installation art include sculptural installation, ephemeral or organic installation. This just means that it's made from a material that will break down over time. Sensorial or tactile installation, so an installation that appeals to one of the five senses or that you can touch. Light installation, kinetic installation, which just means installation artworks that move on their own. Sound installation, interactive installation, and video installation. But a lot of artists often incorporate different elements of each of these within an art installation. Alan Kaprow is an American artist who was one of the first artists to start working in installation. So installation art emerged in around the 1960s. Kaprow experimented with creating art environments as well as what he called happenings, which is a term that's used to describe a spontaneous event which incorporates multiple art forms. Kaprow coined the term happening as an alternative to the constraints of the idea of a traditional art exhibition. So this is a work by Kaprow from 1961 called Yard. Yard was originally made in the sculpture garden of the Martha Jackson Gallery in New York. The tires pictured here are actually placed over the existing sculptures which couldn't be removed from the sculpture garden. The work consisted of hundreds of used tires covering the ground in no particular order. Visitors were encouraged to walk on the tires and throw them around as they pleased. Kaprow used everyday materials that were usually considered to be trash, the tires, and encouraged the audience to interact with the work by climbing all over it, in order to redefine what is considered to be art and challenge people's ideas of art as something that is to be revered and something that you don't touch or interact with. Another work by Kaprow is this work called Fluids from 1967. And this was a series of ephemeral outdoor installations. In October 1967, with the assistance of volunteers, Kaprow built several structures out of ice at various public locations in California. Each structure measured around 30 by 10 by 8 feet, and once in place, the structures were simply left to melt. So here are some images of these works melting over time. And this work was also reconstructed recently for a retrospective of this artist's work. So as you can see, as the structures start to melt, they also collapse. So this is a flyer for the original happening of these works in 1967. Kaprow described this work as a happening, which was a term artists used in the 1960s to break free of the way in which art was viewed and defined in a traditional exhibition format. Fluids was described as a happening which emphasizes the ephemeral nature of the artwork as it melted over a period of 3 days. This highlights the viewer's experience of the work, or the event, as being more important than the physical object itself. In the end, there is nothing left of the work except for the photo documentation. The feminist art movement also played an important role in the emergence and development of installation art. Woman House was a feminist art installation and performance space which took place in an abandoned Victorian house in Hollywood, California between January 30th and February 28th of 1972. Woman House was the first public exhibition of feminist art, and it was an attempt to reveal the influence of the patriarchy on domesticity and the effect of this unhealthy relation on women and their own sense of identity. Woman House was organized by the artists Judy Chicago and Miriam Shapiro, who were co-founders of the feminist art program at the California Institute of Arts. Chicago and Shapiro sought out an alternative space for their students due to the lack of appropriate studio space for the feminist art program at CalArts. This paved the way for the class to work as a collective group and collaborate on the installations and performances that took place within Woman House. Chicago and Shapiro encouraged their students to use consciousness-raising techniques to generate the content of the exhibition. This evidences the will of feminist culture not only to reimagine the female identity, but also enact it through new social and artistic practices. Together, the students and professors worked to build an environment where women's conventional social roles could be shown, exaggerated, and subverted. The installations organized by Chicago and her students reflected on various issues connected to domesticity and femininity. Unlike a conventional art gallery, the site of the house as a domestic space was important as it reinforced feminist concepts within the artist's work through the ideological and symbolic conflation of women and houses. In a way, the house itself was almost transformed into a symbolic art object for the duration of the exhibition by the artworks that existed within it. Only women were allowed to view the exhibition on its first day, after which the exhibition was open to all viewers. During the exhibition's duration, it received approximately 10,000 visitors. So each room was transformed into a different installation. There were also performances and consciousness-raising events held in the house regularly throughout the exhibition. So this is an example of one of the installations within the house. It's in the kitchen. It's called Eggs to Breast by Vicky Hodgetts. So everything in this room was painted pink except for the eggs and breasts that are on the roof and wall of the room. And as you can see in this installation, a series of eggs on the ceiling slowly transform into breasts as they come down the walls. This work comments on the stereotypical traditional role of woman as nurturer through cooking and breastfeeding by combining images of the kitchen and of a woman's sagging breasts. This work is called In Linen Closet by Sandy Orgel. This work comments on the condition of women as housewives in American society and the toxic relationship that this establishes with the household. The work consists of a female mannequin incorporated into a piece of furniture, trapped and identified with the object itself. The work denounces the objectification of women and provides a visual example of how female identity is shaped by the stereotypical connection to everyday house errands. So all of these works are really good examples of site-specific installation in the terms that they're actually working with the rooms and built-in closets that already exist within the house. This work is called Nightmare Bathroom by Robin Schiff. This work symbolizes the vulnerability that women have to face even within their own homes. It's made completely from sand, and the sculpture depicts a woman in her bathtub. The silhouette of a snake is outlined on the floor, making its way into the tub, embodying the fear that anyone could intrude. The sculpture, fittingly, was worn down over the course of its showing by onlookers unable to stop themselves from reaching out to touch the piece. This work is called The Nursery by Shawnee Wallerman. This room featured oversized furniture and toys to simulate the feeling of being young, a small person in a big room. Special attention was made to make the space an androgynous, ideal living space for a child. If anyone's interested in learning anything more about Women House, there's a really good documentary on YouTube which not only documents a walkthrough of all the installations, but it also documents a lot of the performances that happened in the space as well as the consciousness-raising events. And I will post a link to that in the installation module on Canvas. So this is a work called The Dinner Party by Judy Chicago. And The Dinner Party is a seminal feminist art installation which is permanently housed at the Elizabeth Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum. This is an intense research-based art installation which represents 1,038 women in history. 39 women are represented by place settings, and another 999 names are inscribed on the heritage floor on which the table rests. This work is intended to memorialize and pay tribute to specific women who have made a mark on history. The triangle shape of the table and the tiles on the floor is representative of a symbol of equality, measuring 48 feet on each side with a total of 39 place settings, each devoted to a guest of honor. The guests of honor commemorated on the table are designated by means of an intricately embroidered runner. Each is executed in a historically specific manner. Upon these are placed for each setting a gold ceramic chalice and utensils, a napkin with an embroidered edge, and a 14-inch china painted plate with a central motif based on butterfly and vulva forms. This can also be sometimes referred to as central core imagery, and it's something that emerged out of the feminist art movement. Each place setting is the same format to symbol how all of the women experienced the same oppression on account of being a woman. Each place setting is rendered in a style appropriate to the individual woman to honor them as an individual of their particular time. Wing 1 of the table begins in prehistory with the primordial goddess and continues chronologically with the development of Judaism. It then moves to early Greek societies to the Roman Empire, marking the decline in women's power, signified by Haptia's place setting. Wing 2 represents early Christianity through the Reformation, depicting women who signify early expressions of the fight for equal rights. Wing 3 begins with Anne Hutchinson and addresses the American Revolution, suffragism, and the movement toward women's increased individual creative expression, symbolized at last by Georgia O'Keeffe. And it's interesting to note how this plate is quite flat. It's mainly just the texture is created through painting dimension onto the plate. And then as you kind of move around the table, the plates become a lot more sculptural and have more dimension. This is the Susan B. Anthony plate. This is the Virginia Woolf plate. And this is the Georgia O'Keeffe plate. I'm going to be showing a lot of video during this lecture simply because the nature of installation, it really helps to see a walkthrough of the experience of the work so you can kind of get a bit of an idea of the experience. So the first video that I'm going to show you guys is a walkthrough of the dinner party. The work is made using techniques such as embroidery and china painting, which are usually associated with the decorative arts and women's work. This seeks to elevate this labor to the realm of high art and challenge the hierarchy between art and craft. This is also particularly seen through the monumental scale of the work. Due to the amount of labor involved, this was a collaborative project which took 6 years to complete, and 129 people worked on this project. So this is an image of everybody in the studio. This is an image of some women working in the tapestry studio. Some people working on the tiled floor. So it really was a really monumental project. And this is some people working on the ceramic plates in the ceramic studio. There's a really comprehensive walkthrough of the dinner party that's actually narrated by Judy Chicago herself that you can watch on YouTube if anyone's interested in that. I'll also post that in the installation module, so you can just click a link to watch that if you're interested in learning a bit more. So this is a work called Silver Clouds by Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol is an American artist. He's probably one of the most famous American artists, famous for essentially inventing pop art. This installation of mylar balloons are filled half with helium and half with air, so they don't float too high within the space. They are an ephemeral object. Some of the balloons only last up to 7 days. So this is another example of an artist using installation to challenge traditional ideas about art. For instance, that it's something precious that you don't touch or interact with. Instead, with this installation, as you inhabit the space with the balloons, you influence their movement. So in a way, you become a part of the work by interacting with it. The shiny surface of the balloons also reflects their surroundings. So this includes the people that are in the room interacting with these balloons. So your image becomes physically incorporated into the work as well. So this is some images of Andy Warhol installing the silver balloons.
Even as the chaos of the factory intensified, Warhol's creative energies continued to soar upward. In the fall of 1965, he announced he was leaving painting behind entirely to focus on a new series of projects involving music, dance, performance art, and film, and a rock and roll group he had recently been introduced to called the Velvet Underground. On October 4th, to mark his farewell to painting, he released the first in a series of helium-filled silver balloons from the roof of the factory and watched them float away into the ether above Midtown Manhattan.
Oh, it's beautiful. It really is. Oh, it's infinite because it goes in with the sky. Oh, it is fantastic. This is one of the most exciting things that's ever happened.
It was the beginning of what would prove to be the most creative, chaotic, and fateful period of his entire career.
Andy always said everything is on the surface, just look there and you'll see everything that's there. He didn't have an intention to be heavy materials-wise or to be deep image-wise. He liked being surface. He was audacious. And somehow he knew that what he was doing was right on point. It was always exactly what needed to be done at that exact time. And it was beyond being hip and cool even. It was genius.
Warhol is sometimes thought of as a light and breezy artist, sometimes as a rather dark one. I think of him as pretty dark, even at his lightest and breeziest. This installation, Silver Pillows from 1966, It's Warhol's take on the ultra-seriousness of minimalist sculpture of the time, but also it's a complete negative, couldn't care less comment upon it. His pink and yellow cow wallpaper from the same exhibition, exhibited here exactly as it was then, in a room adjacent to his silver floaty pillows, is an up yours to contemporary abstract painting, with its abstruse theories of colour and flatness.
So picking up where Matthew Collins just left off, Andy Warhol was also one of the first artists to experiment with using wallpaper to create an installation environment for his painting work. Essentially, he was just translating his screen-printed paintings onto wallpaper in an attempt to kind of blur the distinction between his paintings and the gallery space. Many artists still use wallpaper to create immersive environments. This is an image of an interactive installation by the Australian artist Jemima Wyman. It's an installation that she created for the Children's Art Centre at the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane. And here she uses wallpaper to create an immersive psychedelic environment of pattern on pattern on pattern that's intended to be dazzling and disorienting at the same time. So here you can see how she sort of breaks up the pattern of the wall using color and pattern to sort of confuse about the shape of the wall and fracture the shape of the wall and really create a dynamic psychedelic space. Within this installation, she also created a video installation in which the walls were painted and then a video was projected onto the walls. And this was intended to blur the physical space of the gallery with the virtual space of the work, so that the people who were standing in the space watching the work were kind of situated somewhere in between those two spaces. This is a work called Work Number 247, Half the Air in a Given Space, by the artist Martin Creed. Martin Creed is a Scottish artist who's based in the UK. You can see how this is influenced by Andy Warhol's Silver Pillows. But this work is more about using an everyday material such as a balloon as an ephemeral tool because it pops and it deflates to change the way that we experience a space. So this work is site-specific and it's been recreated many times. Martin Creed is an interesting artist. All of the titles of his works are simply numbered and then given a descriptive title. So he's recreated this work for several different gallery spaces, and just because of the nature of balloons, they simply fill up the space depending on what the size, but sometimes he changes the size and the color of the balloons depending on the gallery. So this is work number 1562, but it's still titled Half the Air in Any Given Space. So as you walk into the space, the balloons cause you to physically experience a tactile feeling of the air in the room. There's also a childlike playfulness to the work as it sort of resembles an adult ball pit. And balloons are also something that we associate with birthday parties and celebrations. An interesting element of this work comes from people's interaction with it. As you move through it, there's obviously a lot of static electricity that's generated, which gives your body a strange sensation. And there's also the occasional popping of balloons, which creates a nervous energy around the work. So this is an installation by the Korean artist Lee Bull called Majestic Splendor from 1997. And this consisted of a series of mylar bags that were attached to the gallery wall on a grid, and each bag contained a raw fish that had been adorned with beaded flowers. The fish slowly rot throughout the duration of the exhibition, which creates a suffocating stench within the gallery. Lee explains that she was inspired to use beaded flowers by her childhood memories of her mother stringing beads. So this creates the beaded flowers on the rotting fish creates this interesting tension between allure and repulsion. This work is an example of an artist using an ephemeral material to create a sensorial work, which evolves over time through decomposition and smell. You will have a different experience of the work depending on what day you go to see it. So this is a detail of one of the adorned fish. Lee Bull is also well known for her series of cyborg sculptures. The shape of the female robotic figures in this series resembles the sexualized characters in Japanese anime. The pure white, goddess-like figures also recalls ancient Greek sculptures, but they are imperfect, hanging from the ceiling, missing a head, arm, or a leg, almost like a fractured ruin. This is a detail of one of these cyborg sculptures. Lee drew inspiration for this series from A Cyborg Manifesto, which is a famous essay written by American biologist and feminist science philosopher Donna Haraway in 1985. Short for cybernetic organism, a cyborg is a fusion of machine and organism. In contrast to the dystopian worldview of most science fiction movies, Haraway views the cyborg identity in a positive light. Her explanation is that the concept of the cyborg allows us to expand our sensibilities, dismantling the discriminatory boundaries and divisions of gender and race, and build a new politics. So this is an interesting example of using suspended sculpture to create a sculptural installation. So in this image we have 3 of those cyborg sculptures alongside another work by Lee Bull called Transcription, Drift and Scatter. And it's interesting to note how within the white walls of the gallery, these sculptures kind of fade in and out depending on how close that you'd be standing to them. This is another installation work by Lee Bull called Untitled, 2003. And this is the most complex of Lee Bull's series of monsters. It comprises a white central body composed of multiple parts that simultaneously evoke the bodily and the technological or cybernetic. Exploding outwards into space from this central body are other parts of the form, including an octopus-like head that appear and are arranged as fragments of the one entity. So this is an interesting example of how she's used suspended sculpture to create a dynamic environment in which the organism, which is part organic, part mechanic, appears to be exploding as if it's frozen in time. And it's interesting to note with this installation how she's created a completely black background and floor to really highlight the detail of the sculpture and the detail of this kind of frozen exploding effect. Urs Fischer is an artist originally from Switzerland. This is an example, this is an installation view from his recent retrospective at MoCA in Los Angeles. And it's just interesting to see how it includes several different sculptural works and installations interacting with each other in the one space. It's also interesting to note the hole that's cut out of the wall instead of simply just having a usual door. Urs Fischer has cut this hole out of the wall and then rested the cut-out piece in the background at the very back of the room. So almost incorporating the gallery itself as part of an object or part of the installation of the work. This is a detail of one of the works in that image called Horses Dream of Horses. It's a series of 1800 raindrops made out of plaster resin, steel, nylon filament, each of them about 6 by 2 by 2 inches. And they've all, this is another good example of suspending sculpture to create an installation. This work turns a sensorial experience such as rain into a cartoonish one. By suspending these raindrops at an angle, Fisher animates this object to trigger the feeling of that sensation, even though these are solid objects. This work also plays with the teardrop shape as a simple representation of a raindrop that can also be used as a symbol that has emotional connotations, such as a teardrop, sadness, gloom, crying, things like that. This work is called Untitled Bread House, and it's a small cabin-sized house made entirely out of bread. This work is ephemeral as the bread starts to degrade throughout the exhibition. As you can see, it's sort of shedding on the floor as it goes stale and starts to crumble apart. These works are generally built specifically just for an exhibition and then later dismantled. This work has an interesting, surreal and absurdist quality as it plays with our ideas of memory and fairy tales. Like, it makes me think of Hansel and Gretel. It's an entire house made out of wood instead of made out of bread instead of made out of gingerbread. And this work also generates a sensorial experience through the smell of the bread, which kind of permeates throughout the entire gallery. This is an installation from 2011 called Yes. This is a large-scale installation that's made from 308 tons of air-dry clay that was made into a series of sculptures by 1,500 volunteers over a period of 21 days. This installation is ephemeral as it's made from unfired clay specifically for the duration of this exhibition. So after the exhibition, all of these works would have just been destroyed and thrown away. So the work becomes more about the collective creative process of making this exhibition, and challenges ideas relating to creativity, authenticity, the authority of the artist, and ideas of authorship. So this is an in-process photo of volunteers working on some of these sculptures, and I'll also show you a video of the process that went into making that work. This is another work by Urs Fischer called You. And for this work, he essentially dug up the floor of the gallery so that when you walked in the gallery, you were walking in a space that you never would walk ever. So this was intended to create an experience that the viewer would never have of the gallery space and see unseen components. It's interesting because this is an installation that's solely about changing viewers' perceptions of the gallery space, and the gallery becomes the actual material for the work. So this is interesting to think about in relation to the first image that I showed you of Urs Fischer's work as well, where he had cut out that giant hole in the wall and then used that as a part of the installation itself. This is the artist Ernesto Neto, who's a Brazilian artist. His work explores constructions of social space and the natural world by inviting physical interaction and sensory experience. His work incorporates organic shapes and materials, often incorporating spices, sand, and shells among them, that engage all five senses, producing a new type of sensory perception that renegotiates boundaries between artwork and viewer, the organic and man-made, the natural, spiritual, and social worlds. His work is often interactive, inviting the viewer to touch, climb onto the work, in an effort to engage all five senses. This is a work called Humanoids Family from 2001. And as you can see in this image, it seems to just be like an installation of sculptures. But viewers were actually invited to climb inside of these sculptures, essentially being hugged and held by them, creating a complete inversion of the usual relationship that occurs between the viewer and an artwork. Here, the sculpture creates a protective shell around the viewer. These are also scented with lavender, so it almost encourages us to return to a child or womb-like state. This installation from 2006 is called The Creature, and this kind of continues those ideas from the Humanoids Family. But in this case, he's actually created an architectural womb-like space for the viewers to inhabit. This work seeks to create a sense of community amongst the audience as they are encouraged to interact with each other in a way that they ordinarily wouldn't within a gallery context. So, encouraging them to be playful and vulnerable. This walk is called Salut Nave. It happens in the body of time with Truth Dances from 2004. So this is another example of how he's created an architectural, like a temporary fabric architectural structure that encourages people to participate and touch and experience the work. This work is interesting because it really highlights his use of transparent fabric to make this temporary structure, which will later be dismantled after the exhibition. So it's intended just to be set up temporarily. And inside the work, here's just the detail of people interacting in sort of the soft, cushy part inside of the work. This work is called Anthropodino from 2009, and what's super interesting about this work is just to mark the giant scale that he has created within the Armory in New York City, which is essentially an old airport hangar. So it's designed for large scale installations. It's also interesting to note the almost like bone-like plywood structures that he's using here to support his fabric environment.
There was a group of us founded by our chairman, Wade Thompson. It was his idea originally to rescue the Armory. I joined the group as a volunteer in 1997. It was about 3/4 the size of a real-size football field.
The architecture, I think, is a section on a cylinder with air inside. I think this is air is what interests me. When I came to New York, all of these things, very, very sexy, making money. But you know, when the thing falls down, and you can not do anything, you become sensual. You become like more movement, more ballet.
Ernesto Neto, of course, is a Brazilian contemporary artist. We engaged Tom Eccles, who used to be head of the Public Art Fund, to be our curator. He came with Ernesto last December, and Ernesto lay on this floor after we'd been out for dinner and had a few drinks, and looked up and imagined this whole thing. We had our first cultural event, which was Aaron Young's greeting card, the Motorcycle Ballet. So we became the sort of annex site to the Whitney Biennial. We are now moving towards becoming more of a presenter. Our first commission is Ernesto Neto.
I like it when one thing touch the other, you know, is the in-between you and me. This piece is made by computer and sewing machine. It's completely a cultural construction, but it's completely natural. It's a very primitive architecture. It reminds the architecture of the native Brazilian Indians. Yesterday, when we left here, it gave me a feeling that this piece is made by sand. And you're gonna say, no, Ernest, we can see it's made by plywood and textile. And I'm gonna say, no, it's made by sand. I begin to say, that's the beach, you know. I begin to see it so much. I always think that my work, it get out from my brain and get out through my arm and get out to the ground, you know. In fact, I'm gonna pick up something to show it to you. I'll be back. So if you see this bag here, this would be a seed. You have a little bag, something hanging, and then you give birth to that with an action. You know, I think this action is very interesting. And then you have the art. It's to be connected here, you know, to make the lips of the piece, something that get out of ourselves through our hands.
It will have many spices in it. Turmeric, cloves, and then pepper, and we're figuring out which pepper.
This is all animal architecture. Spice is a sweat of the piece because we smell. It's good to smell. It smells good. I love to smell, you know. Oh, you know, I remember when you have a girlfriend and you don't see the girlfriend for 10 years. When I smell her, even I think about that, I feel like I'm gonna fall down, you know. Okay, thank you. The bottom piece is the figure, and the top piece is that balloons that you have in cartoon to read. It's a thinking, it's a dream, it's a fantasy, you know, that's getting out of the head of it. I think this bruteness of this roughness in the middle of this everything finished, everything clean of Uptown is fantastic. I don't want the history of it. And I think this is a story to begin.
So this is another work by Ernesto Neto called Madness is Part of Life from 2012. And I thought that this would be interesting to show as well, because in this work he more obviously incorporates craft elements that are familiar and everyday through using this hand knitting, crocheting technique with fabric and string. By doing this, he seeks to make the work more approachable and familiar, while also elevating these craft practices to the realm of art. By doing this, he's challenging what materials and methods can be used to create an artwork, as well as how we are expected to interact with it. So this is another view of that work and people interacting with that work. This is an artwork, another artwork by Ernesto Neto called Gaia Mother Tree from 2018. And this work was made entirely by hand by knotting together strips of cotton with a finger crocheting technique to form this giant transparent structure. The upper part of the work is shaped like the crown of a tree and covers the ceiling of the station concourse in which this is installed. At the base of the tree, there's a large space where visitors can linger and rest on seats arranged in a circle. Drop-shaped elements hang from the branches and they're filled again with aromatic spices and seeds. So with this installation, there was also a month-long corresponding public and education program that took place inside the installation. So it's interesting because it's not only visually striking, but it was also used as a site for community engagement during the time that it was installed in the station.
So I have to say thank you to all of you because it's your city who are receiving me here. Thank you very much to Baile Foundation, to Sam Keller, to Kiko, and Angelica and everyone from Baile.